against Colin Elders, is that right?
There was a conversation going on amongst a group of people. Mr. Eldert's was the loudest. His was distinguishable.
So, are you saying that you did hear Shane Medeiros' voice, you just didn't know what he was saying?
I'm saying I can't be certain who was talking and everything. I didn't hear what everyone was saying. I could see what they were doing. I could tell people were talking. And Mr. Eldert's was the loudest.
Were you able to hear the cashiers from where you were seated?
I didn't hear anything specifically that they said.
Were you able to hear them at all?
I don't recall.
So you don't know whether they were talking or joking back with Colin and Shane, is that correct?
From what I recall, they were interacting with each other.
But you don't remember being able to hear them?
No, and I can't put myself in their heads to know what their impression of what was going on between the two of them. Whether they were joking back or not.
And that's not what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you, could you hear the cashiers' voices from where you were seated?
I could hear the voices of all the groups. I couldn't pick out whose voices they were aside from Mr. Elder's. I heard female voices, yes. I heard female voices, so I heard the cashiers.
But you did not hear what they were saying?
That's correct.
And you did not hear what Colin Elders was saying?
No, at that point, I did not.
And you did not hear what Shane Medeiros was saying?
No, at this point I hadn't.
Did you notice them when they first walked in?
Yes, I noticed them when they were walking up the aisle.
And now in this particular frame we see the person who has been identified as Mikhail Ryan walking in, is that right?
That's correct.
Let me ask you, until this point in time, which is captured on 2/38/31, no crime had been committed, correct?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Can we please go ahead? Can you stop it real quick? Can you go back a frame? And one more. May I have the time, please?
2:39:34.
Your attention had been drawn to the cashier's counter by this time?
I believe so.
And you heard Mr. Eldertz having a verbal exchange with Mr. Perrine, correct?
I did.
And you have heard it being described by Ms. Salzbrenner as Mr. Eldertz joking with Mr. Perrine, correct?
I heard her testimony.
And Mr. Perrine didn't like it. You heard that testimony?
I did.
And you also intuited that Mr. Perrine didn't like it.
Well, I heard him say something like, just leave me alone.
And you also heard, you said the counter people tell Mr. Eldertz to cut it out, or to stop it.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And is it before or after this frame that you heard them tell Mr. Eldertz to cut it out or to stop?
I don't know what frame it was. When I noticed what was going on, there was already interaction. There was already something up there. I turned up. I looked up because it had gotten louder. and it seemed like a disturbance. So I don't know at what point it was. It was one of the times I saw Mr. Perrine turn to Mr. Elders when he said, "Hey, just leave me alone." I don't know which exact frame it was.
Okay, then why don't we go forward from here, please? I'm sorry.
May I stand and step back?
Sure, absolutely. Oh. Okay. Can we go forward just one frame, please? And then other. And can you tell us the time, please?
This is 2:40:07.
Okay. And then at 2:40:07, Mr. Elders has gone to sit down at the table. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Perrine is on his way.
That's correct.
And Jessica West is basically leaving by the front door. Is that right?
I don't see it in the frame, but yeah, I think she's over there by the front door.
And Adam is by the trash bin doing something preparatory to leaving, correct?
Yes, that's in the trash bin.
So at this point in time, you and Adam and Jessica were basically getting ready to leave to go to Nashville, right?
We were getting ready to leave, yes.
And after you heard the counter people tell Mr. Elders to stop or cut it out with Mr. Perrine, he stopped, didn't he?
No.
He did not.
No, ma'am.
Okay. He kept on with Mr. Perrine while at the counter.
Immediately after I said it, Mr. Elders turned away. But I did see him turn again and say something without a response from Mr. Perrine. And then, as they sat back down, right about here, I believe it is when Mr. Elders again directed something to Mr. Perrine.
And you can take your seat. Thank you. What was it that you said you heard Mr. Elders say to Mr. Perrine?
Mr. Elders said to Mr. Perrine something like, "What's your fucking problem? You want beef?"
You want beef?
Something like that, yeah.
He used the word beef.
I remember the word beef.
Yeah, and you knew what beef meant.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. Perrine basically ignored Mr. Elders, correct?
He turned away.
Okay, and he didn't say anything to Mr. Elders.
No, he didn't.
And it didn't look like he was going to say anything to anybody, did it?
Objection, speculative.
He didn't say anything to anybody after that, did he, Mr. Perrine?
I did not hear Mr. Perrine say anything after that.
And basically, I believe you testified that he out of it.
Yes, ma'am.
So basically, he wasn't being bothered by anything that anybody said, as far as you could see. After this, what was he bothered?
When I saw him at the counter and heard to be left alone, and I saw Elders again turn to Mr. Perrine and say something, I saw that Mr. Perrine didn't respond. And to me, it looked intentional,
Well,
like he was purposely not responding.
at this time,
And
I'm going to object and ask that that answer be stricken as calling for speculation.
All right, sustained. Strike that last answer, jury will disregard. Ask for the next question.
Mr. Deedy, I'm saying that after you heard Colin Elders say to Mikhail Perrine, after Colin was seated, did you say like or want beef?
I don't know exactly what it was. It was something like, do you have a problem? What's your fucking problem? Do you want beef?
Do you want beef? Something like that.
Something like that.
Okay. After that statement to Mr. Perrine and Mr. Perrine looking away,
Sorry.
Mr. Perrine had no further interaction that you saw with Colin Alberts, correct?
That's correct.
And can you go ahead a few frames, please? Stop, please. Thank you. Time, please, Mr. Deedy.
2:40 and 13 seconds.
And in this frame, we can see you walking towards Colin Eldert's table, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And we know from the other frames, the other view, particularly the front dining, that you had stood up and had been watching what was going on for at least a few seconds before this particular frame, correct?
That's correct. I was observing what's going on.
You were observing and assessing.
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. Deedy, at this point in time, 2:40:13, no crime had been committed, correct?
That's correct.
And the only thing that you heard coming from Mr. Eldert's was something that you interpreted as being aggressive was a verbal remark to Mr. Perrine, correct?
What I heard was a aggressive verbal threat.
And Mr. Perrine's reaction to that aggressive verbal threat was to look away.
It appeared, I don't know what was in his mind, if his specific reaction was to turn away because of it, but he immediately turned away and looked the other direction.
And he did not engage Mr. Eldert's, correct?
That's correct.
And so at this point in time, and Mr. Eldert's did not continue engaging Mr. Perrine after Mr. Perrine looked away, did he?
He wasn't saying anything, but he was engaging with him.
But Mr. Eldert's was engaging with him. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
that's your
correct.
testimony.
Yes.
Okay. By the time that you got up and were walking over, no crime had been committed.
I do not believe a crime had been committed at that point.
And at this point in time, Shane Medeiros is still at the counter, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you ever hear Shane Medeiros before this frame engaging in any way with Mikhail Perrine?
I don't believe so.
Can you go forward, please? Can we stop here and go back one and another one? Please read the time.
This is 2:40:22.
And at this point, are you talking to Colin Eldert's?
I don't know. I'd be able to tell better if I saw from the front dining view.
Okay, can we switch to the front dining view, please? And the front dining is what time, please?
This is 2:40:23.
Okay. Can you tell from looking at this view whether you're saying anything to Mr. Eldert's?
In this view, I can see that now where Mr. Eldert's had been turned towards Mr. Prime previously. His head is now turned this way. I can see the brim of his hat. And I am looking down his direction. So this would be an approximate time of when I am speaking to him.
And at this point in time, Adam Butowski is waving goodbye to somebody, is that right?
That's correct.
And he's on his way out.
That's correct.
Did you see him actually waving and leaving, as we've seen in the video?
No, I don't recall that.
What are you saying to Mr. Eldert's?
I walked up to Mr. Eldert's and said, "What's going on here?"
Okay. And at that point in time, you didn't know who Mr. Eldert's was.
That's correct.
He didn't know you as far as you know.
As far as I know. No, sir. No, ma'am.
And at this point in time, Mr. Elder had done nothing illegal.
I don't believe he had broken any laws at this point.
And at this point in time, Mikhail Perrine was totally ignoring him, correct?
It appeared to me that Mr. Prine was trying hard to ignore him.
You heard the testimony of Mr. Perrine when you first started this case, is that right?
That's correct.
And you heard Mr. Perrine testify that it was no big deal what was happening between him and Colin, correct?
I heard all of Mr. Prine's testimony.
And that was part of it, right?
And he also said he doesn't remember any of the interaction except for being called a howler.
And he doesn't remember, but he remembers he wasn't bothered by it, correct?
That's his recollection, his testimony.
And he
Yes.
didn't need help,
That was his testimony.
and that he could handle the situation by himself.
I believe he said that, yes.
And in fact, that's what he was doing when he was sitting there, ignoring Colin Elders, isn't it?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So you went up to this person that you didn't know and asked what is happening, correct?
That's correct.
And Colin's response to you was what?
I don't know what his response, if he did respond to me at that moment.
Can we go back to the cashier queue, please? And go forward a few frames. And stop. And please read the time.
This is 2:40, 27 seconds.
Now, at this point in time, you have turned your back on Colin Elders, correct?
That's correct.
And would it be fair to say that since you've turned your back on Colin Elders, you no longer consider him to be a threat?
No, that's not true. That's not correct.
So did you consider him to be threatening at that time?
He had not threatened me.
Okay. And your attention is turned to Mr. Medeiros, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's because of what he was saying to Mr. Perrine.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
And your attention is turned to Mr. Medeiros because of what he is saying to Mr. Perrine, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And what did you say to him, to Shane Medeiros?
In response to what Mr. Medeiros said to Mr. Perrine, I first said something to Mr. Perrine, and I said, "Are you okay?"
And you received no response.
I received a response from Mr. Medeiros.
You received no response from Mikhail Perrine.
I asked the question and immediately received a response to my question to Mr. Perrine from Mr. Medeiros.
And you received no response from Mikhail Perrine.
If he responded, I did not hear it.
And you said, Mr. Medeiros said something back to you then in response.
That's correct.
And then you continued a conversation with Mr. Medeiros?
That's correct.
Can we go forward, please? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you stop it here and please tell us the time?
This is 2:40:31.
And this is when Ms. Soriano comes up to you and Mr. Medeiros in front of Mr. Eldert's table, correct?
That's correct.
And she's telling you, don't make trouble, or if you're going to make trouble, leave, correct?
That's correct. She said something like that.
And you said that Shane Medeiros and Colin Elderts ignored her, correct?
I'm sorry, I don't recall what I said in my testimony about their responses to her.
And your response was also to ignore her, correct?
I don't believe I said we weren't ignoring her. I turned to Mr. Medeiros and said something like, "She's right. There's no need to cause a problem here," or something along those lines. I did not respond to her.
You didn't turn to Ms. Soriano and say, don't worry, I can handle it, I'm a police officer.
No, I didn't.
And at this point, you hadn't told anybody that you were a police officer.
No, I hadn't.
So you didn't reassure her or anything when she said she doesn't want trouble, or if you're going to make trouble, please leave.
I did not say anything to her.
Please go forward. Can you stop, please? And the time, please, Mr. Deedy?
2:40 and 40 seconds.
And at this point in time, Alexander Bird has come to intervene. Is that right?
Mr. Bird had approached us, yes.
And he was trying to calm things down, correct?
Yes, that was his stated intention.
Okay, and you had been trying before then, correct?
To calm things down?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
You are not successful in doing so.
Actually, I was under the impression that Mr. Medeiros was going to let things go.
When you were talking to him or after Mr. Bird intervened?
After the security guard approached us, I said something else, and Mr. Bird approached and said something similar to what I said. And Mr. Medeiros, based on his physical expressions, was not as angry as before. He looked angry. Now he did not look angry. And yes, I believed he was listening to us and was going to let it go.
You believe that he was listening to you as well as Mr. Bird?
And the security guard, yes.
So he was calming down.
I believe so.
Can we go forward, please? Can we stop here? And read the time, please.
This is 2:40:48.
And at this point in time, Mr. Medeiros has turned away with Mr. Bird. Is that right?
In this frame, Mr. Medeiros has walked away from the position where he was standing with myself, and Mr. Medeiros has turned back looking at the table where Mr. Eldridge is sitting.
I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I meant between the frame before this one and this one, Mr. Medeiros had turned away from the situation. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Along with Mr. Bird.
Yes,
And now Mr. Bird is going back to the counter. Is that right?
that's correct.
Now, however, you are speaking to Colin Elders.
Yes, I am.
Okay. At the time when Mr. Bird turned Shane Medeiros away from interacting with Mr. Perrine, no crime had been committed. Is that right?
That's correct.
While Mr. Bird and Mr. Medeiros turned away, you turned back to Colin Elders. Isn't that right?
I believe that I turned prior to them turning away.
Okay, and it was a few frames ahead before this one that we see on the screen, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And the reason that you turned back to address Mr. Medeiros is because he had said something to you.
Well, I object the state's testimony to turn back to Mr. Medeiros.
I'm sorry, to Mr. Elders.
I'm sorry, could you just...
Yes, sure. The reason you turned back to Mr. Elders is because he had said something to you.
Yes, that's correct.
Can we go a few frames forward, please? Okay, stop. Thank you. Please tell us the time.
This is 2:40:49.
And Mr. Elders is seated,
That's correct.
and his hands are on the table.
Yes, I believe I can see it. Yeah, his arms are on the table.
Okay. And you are talking to him.
Yes, ma'am.
And Jessica West has come back into McDonald's. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And at this point in time, had any crime been committed?
No, ma'am.
Can we go forward, please? Can you stop here and switch to the front dining view, please? And go back one frame. Okay, and the time, Mr. Deedy, please.
This is 2:40:53.
And I believe this is when you were saying that you had identified yourself to Colin Elders. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Jessica West is standing immediately to your left, is that right?
No, ma'am.
Oh, no, she's not?
No, she was standing behind me and to my left.
Okay, but she has a view directly of Colin Elders, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Can we go to the cashier view on this same frame, please? Okay, and can you give me the time on that, please?
2:40:54.
Why don't we go back one and then go forward again? So we'll go back to 2:40:52 and then go to 2:40:54. So during this sequence that we've seen from the cashier view, that's when you say you're identifying yourself to Colin Elders, is that right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And I believe you called it showing your creds?
Yes.
Okay, that means showing your credentials.
It's a common term, whether it's showing my credentials or the actual badge. In this instance, I meant my badge, not my credentials.
Okay, but you called it creds.
Yes.
Okay. And Jessica West, you say she's standing behind you?
Yes, she was standing slightly behind me to the left.
In other words, she's not completely touching the table in front of her, is that right?
I was closer to the table than she was.
How much closer were you to the table than she was?
It's hard to tell in this video, but look at the angles using the tiles. She's maybe a foot behind me, tops. Not much.
I'm sorry, could you say that into the mic, please?
Yes. She might have been about a foot to behind me to my left.
Okay, but there is nothing that obstructing her vision between you and, between her and Colin Elders, is that right?
Obstructing her vision of Colin Elders?
Yes.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. And there's nothing obstructing her vision between herself and you, correct?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Now, I believe it was at this point in time you said that the reason you showed your creds was because you felt that the force needed to be escalated. Is that right?
My level. The force used again. Yes. Based on his threats to me, I need to escalate the level of force that I was using.
Okay. And those threats were what?
I believe directly preceding that, he had said, "I'll fuck you up."
And Colin Elders, at this point in time, his threat was directed, his "I'll fuck you up" threat was directed to you, right?
Yes.
Nobody else.
No, when he said it, I don't believe it just... See, when I pulled out my creds, that was after I had identified myself. And I don't think that Jess was at the table or that Mr. Medeiros was there either.
So his aggression with that statement was directed solely to you, correct?
Yes, it was directly at me.
Okay. And you decided that you need to up your show of force at that point.
Yes, I needed to assert my command presence and identify myself.
When Jessica West came back into the McDonald's, didn't she tell you, "Let's go"?
At what point?
When she came back into the McDonald's and we see her by your side, didn't she tell you, "Let's go"?
Like right here in this frame?
Not necessarily in this frame, and she could have been when she was walking up, but by the time she got here, didn't she tell you, "Let's go"?
I was interacting with Mr. Elders. I didn't hear her say anything to me.
You did not hear her say anything?
No, I didn't. No, not at all.
Okay. At this point in time, you knew that Jessica had returned from outside McDonald's, is that right?
I knew that she was standing next to me, yes.
And you knew that she had gone out previous to that?
I don't believe I actually knew she was outside. Before that, when she walked there, I was watching the interaction at the counter and then watching Mr. Elders and Mr. Perrine. I was not watching what she was doing.
At this point in time, you could have just walked out with Jessica West and not put anyone in danger, correct?
I believe that there was still a threat to Mr. Perrin.
The reason you said yesterday that you thought you needed to escalate the level of force shown was because of the threat to you, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And Mr. Elderts was directing his attention solely to you, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Mr. Perrine was not paying attention to anyone, correct?
At this point, I could not see what Mr. Perrin was doing.
But after you saw him look away, he did not seem engaged with anyone, correct?
Look away from Mr. Elderts?
Yes.
No, he looked away from Mr. Elderts, and when Mr. Perrin looked away, he looked at the counter towards Mr. Medeiros, and then Mr. Medeiros turned and addressed him.
Okay, and then Mr. Medeiros had
When
already...
I say him, I mean Mr. Perrin.
Okay, but by this point in time, the frame that we're seeing here, Mr. Medeiros had already, because of Mr. Bird's intervention, stopped even thinking about Mr. Perrine as far as you knew, correct?
Well, I object as to what Mr. Medeiros might have been thinking speculatively.
Mr. Medeiros had no further interaction with Mr. Perrine after Mr. Bird broke him up or took him away from that situation, correct?
I did not see any. I was interacting with Mr. Elderts.
Okay, and the only interaction that you had with Mr. Elderts after Mr. Bird had taken Shane Medeiros out of the Mr. Perrine situation, your only focus was on Colin Elderts.
I object. One final question.
Could you please repeat that?
After Mr. Medeiros turned his attention away from Mr. Perrine, the only person that Colin Elderts was focused on was you, correct?
Well, I object because it calls for a conclusion of mine.
All right,
Another
sustain,
person.
rephrase.
The only person that Colin Elderts was interacting with at that point in time was you, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
So, and I'm sorry, Mr. Elderts had told you what?
He said, I'll fuck you up.
And did you think that that was a federal crime?
At the time, I did not.
Did you think that was a federal misdemeanor?
No, at the time I did not. I had not identified myself.
And at the time that he told you, I'm going to fuck you up, his anger was directed at you, correct?
Yes, he directed that statement and threat to me.
When Jessica West, by the time Jessica West came back into McDonald's, you could have left that situation without any danger to you or Jessica West, correct?
Objection speculative and asked and answered.
Could you say that again, please?
By the time we see you and Jessica West here in this frame, rather than showing your creds to Colin Elderts, you and Jessica could have left McDonald's in complete safety, correct?
That'd only be speculation. He had just threatened to hurt me. If I had tried to walk to his left or to his right, I don't know what he would have done.
He was seated at the time, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And his hands were on the table.
Yes, the table that was
So-
a barrier between us.
And so, would you characterize his posture at this point in time as being non-aggressive?
No.
No. Okay. So, what about his posture here was aggressive? When he's seated, you are standing, his hands are on the table.
His tone, the threatening language.
I'm talking about posture, Mr. Deedy.
Yes, posture is a term that refers to how someone, and from my understanding, I'm sorry if I'm misunderstanding your question, is how someone is holding themselves, whether it's standing or seated. He was threatening me, his arms were on the table, and he was aggressively leaning towards me, and had anger on his face.
Okay. You knew he didn't have, he was not carrying a weapon in his hands that you saw at that time, correct?
I did not see a weapon in his hands, no.
Okay. Did you feel threatened at that time?
Yes, I did.
Did you tell Jessica West that maybe it would be better if she left because you were feeling threatened.
No, I didn't.
Did you feel that did you feel that Mr. Eldritz might harm other people in McDonald's at that point in time?
Not at that point in time, no. Well, I take it back. I'm sorry. Yes, I still believe there was a threat against Mr. Prime.
So, do you feel that in this point in time, Colin Eldritz is threatening you and Mr. Perrine?
At this moment, he is directly threatening me. And it was because of me responding to his threats to Mr. Perrine.
And
There was nothing that indicated that Mr. Eldrit's aggression to Mr. Perrine had subsided. From what I saw, it was now directed at me. He never told me, for instance, oh, I'm no longer upset with Mr. Perrine.
It does seem, though, to be directing his aggression at you at this point, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Let's continue. Can we stop here, please? And may we have the time?
This is 2:41 and 0 seconds.
Okay, and where's Ms. West's attention at this point in time?
This is the side of her face. She's standing, it looks to me like a little to my left. She's turning either towards myself or the security guard, it looks like.
And by this time, Adam Butowski has returned as well, correct?
Yes, I can see him right there.
And do you remember seeing him there at that time when you were there?
No, I don't recall it.
Do you remember Adam ever telling you what's going on?
No, I don't.
Do you remember ever telling you, let's go?
No, I don't.
Do you remember Jessica West telling you at this point, let's go?
No, I don't.
Okay. You can zoom your seat. Can you please go forward? Okay, can we stop? Oops, I'm sorry. Go back one, please. Can we go back another one, please? And please give us the time.
This is 2:41 and 3 seconds.
Okay, and Mr. Gutowski is into your immediate left, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And Jessica West can't be seen in this frame, right?
No, I can't see her.
Do you remember her being immediately in front or on your right side? In front of you or on your right side?
You mean in this frame?
At this point in time.
I don't remember this exact point in time.
Okay?
I remember that Jessica, at one point early on, was standing to my left. And at that point, I became alarmed, and I moved her to my right. I don't know where she is at this point. I don't know where that is.
Okay, well, you became, you can sit down, thank you. You became alarmed
Yes,
for
ma'am.
what?
Based on Mr. Elwood's reaction to me.
Okay, and we'll get to the reaction in a minute, but when you became alarmed, you moved Jessica West to the side of you, is that what you said?
Yes.
Out of the way of Mr. Eldritz? I mean, what was the purpose of your moving her to the side?
Mr. Eldritch was directly in front of me. He was speaking to me very loudly and aggressively. And at that point, I realized that Jess was on my left. And with him threatening me, I did not want him to come up if he came to me and come to her, so I moved her to my side. I have this distinct memory of being fearful for her.
Okay. And being fearful for her, did you tell her, hey, you and Adam, just get out of here?
No, I didn't say that.
Did you tell the security guard, I'm afraid something's going to happen here, call the police?
No, I didn't.
And you say that the security guard actually came up and touched you
Yes,
and
ma'am.
said she was going to call the police.
She touched me, and I heard her say, I'm going to call the police.
And was it in this frame that she touched you or a few ahead?
She is touching me in this frame, and I remember it happening at about the same time that Mr. Eldridge was standing.
She didn't know you were a police officer, correct? Or a cop or a law enforcement officer at this point in time?
I don't know if she saw when I pulled out my creds in this time. I know she was standing behind me, and I thought she may have, but I couldn't be certain if she had.
And you heard her testify, and you heard her say that she did not know.
Yes, I did hear that. And I've also seen the frame that she's not looking in my direction when I have the creds out.
Okay. And so, but yet she goes up and touches you and says she's calling the police. Is that right?
She touched me. I didn't say she was specifically addressing me. And as you see later, she puts her arms out to other people. I believe she was addressing the crowd. The group of people.
I would move to strike. Calls for speculation.
Well, I'm responsive to the question.
And the question was, she's touching you, isn't she?
Yes, she is touching me in this frame.
And your friends, Adam and Jessica, are to your side, left and right, respectively. Is that right?
Well, I see Adam. I think, as I said before, I don't see Jessica in this frame.
Now, you said that you heard the security guard say that she was going to call 911.
She said she was calling the police.
Do you know whether she actually did that?
I know now that she did.
How long after she told you did she call the police?
Are you asking if I know now, or if I knew then?
If you know now, because you watched the video.
Yes, I have a good idea of when she called the police.
And that would be approximately 30 seconds after you said that she said she was going to. Is that correct?
I think that's a good estimation without looking at the timestamp.
At this point in time, there had been no federal crime committed, correct?
I would say no.
And at this point in time, you could have told your friends, let's get out of here and go.
Could have done many things. I was trying to process what was going on. It was happening very, very quickly.
You could have done many things, but leaving was an option, correct?
Attempting to leave was an option.
That was an
No.
option you chose not to take.
I believed it would be irresponsible to leave at that moment.
And you believe it would be irresponsible, I believe you testified yesterday, because this was a situation that you felt responsible for. Is that right?
Why? The reason I believe that it would have been irresponsible to leave is that when I respond to something as a law enforcement officer, I have a duty to follow through with the result of that response.
As a law enforcement officer, you're always trying to de-escalate a situation, correct?
That's one of our primary objectives when we respond to a situation.
As a law enforcement officer, the last thing you want is a physical confrontation, correct?
I am trained, we are trained to try physical confrontations with people.
And the last thing you want as a law enforcement officer is to basically make things worse, correct?
We do not try to make things worse.
That would be contrary to your training, correct?
Trying to make something worse would go against my training.
Okay. at this point in time, you had showed your creds to Mr. Medeiros, excuse me, to Mr. Elders, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I believe you said that his response to your showing your creds was a surprise to you.
At the moment, yes, it was not. It took me back.
Because he didn't acquiesce to anything that you were saying?
From my experience,
Why was it a surprise to you?
it was a surprise to me because from my experience, after identifying a police officer and issuing a sort of command, more than likely the person will listen to you.
And in this case, whatever you said to Colin Elders, he just got more angry, correct?
It appeared that that was the reason he became even more angry.
And you were surprised and shocked by this, correct?
That's correct.
And it took you, you said you had to stop and assess what was happening, right?
I stepped back and, yes, I continued to assess what was going on.
You knew, though, that whatever you had done had not pacified the situation, correct?
Yes, I knew that my action had not pacified the situation.
In fact, you knew that your action had made the situation worse, correct?
Yes, that's what it appeared to me.
And at that point in time, when the situation was getting worse, Mr. Eldred's anger was directed at you, correct?
Yes.
At that point in time, that you basically taken responsibility for that situation, correct?
Object. There's a question related to what was said there or what the witness testified to ambiguously.
You testified, I'll raise your honor. You testified yesterday that this was a situation for which you took responsibility, is that right?
I responded to the situation I was observing, and by responding, I was responsible for the outcome of the situation.
And at this point in time, with Mr. Elder's anger directed solely at you, you and your friends could have just left McDonald's, correct?
I don't believe that's correct.
What was stopping you?
He had threatened me with violence. And for me to try to use the side door, which is, it's hard for me to tell in this angle, but this is a very small space. To try to walk to his left, I would have to go through Mr. Medeiros. To walk to Mr. Elders' right, I would have to walk within 1 or 2 feet of him if he had just threatened me. To safely leave myself, I could not be assured of that. And second, I had a responsibility to remain. I still was not satisfied that he would not, especially after showing how angry he really was and making actual physical threats, that he wouldn't return to his original target, Mr. Perrine, who to me was vulnerable and a target.
Okay, so you're saying that you did not think that you could safely leave.
I did not believe that it was a sure thing that I could leave safely.
Was it a sure thing that your friends could leave safely?
I cannot speak for that either. But based on the way that Mr. Elders was directing his aggression to me, they could have attempted to leave.
Did you tell them to leave?
No, I didn't.
You were afraid for their safety.
I was afraid, I was concerned primarily for my safety right at that moment. And not that he was directing his aggression towards my friends, I think you asked, but that if he did come at me, that they could be in the way. However, this, I think, is only seconds after I showed my credentials. In a matter of seconds, there's a lot of things to process through your head.
Okay, and one of those things was surprise at what had happened.
That's correct.
And you were still processing at this point that we see on the screen right now?
Through any interaction with a person that's assaultive, you're continuously processing what's going on.
Well,
So
when you
yes, I was.
Well, when you say assaultive, at this point in time, the only assaultive indicator was what he said to you, correct?
No, that's not true.
Okay, what did he do that was assaultive?
The words he was using, as you said, and also,
Verbal.
I'm sorry,
That's verbal, correct?
and also his body posture, the way he wasn't sitting, leaning back with his feet up. He was aggressively, now his hands before had been crossed, he moved his hands were out here like this, and he was leaning towards me, with an aggressive look on his face.
And there was a table between you and him, correct?
Yes, there was a table between us.
At what point in time were you able to assess the situation, as you say?
I was assessing the situation through this entire minute and a half incident.
And I believe you said that at this point in time, or excuse me, after Mr. Eldritch stood up, you still had not made a full assessment of what exactly was going on. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you ever make a full assessment of what was going on?
I still haven't made a full assessment of what was going on.
You talked a lot yesterday about assault and pre-assault indicators. Do you remember that?
Yes, ma'am.
And tying in each frame to your training. Do you remember that?
Tying in each frame of the video to my
When
training?
you were explaining what you were doing, tying it into your training.
I believe I used the frames as a framework for some of the actions that I took, and yes, related that to my training.
Can you go forward, please? Stop, please. And can you tell us the time?
This is 2:41:07.
Okay, and this is a cashier view, and I believe yesterday you testified that this was the point at which you saw Mr. Eldritch touch his waistband. Is that correct?
As Mr. Eldritch stood up from the table, I saw him do a grab at his waistband.
Can we just go back a few frames to where he's seated and then come back to this? Okay, stop. So what hand did you see him use to touch his pat his
The
waistband?
frame, please.
I'm sorry, this is the same one. Will you have the time?
This is 2:41:07.
What hand did you see him pat his waistband with?
His right hand.
His right hand, okay?
And when I say waistband, I don't mean that he lifted up his shirt and touched his belt or the waistband. The waistband is the waistband area, meaning the area that would cross his waist.
Okay. And you say he did that between the time he sat down and the time we see here now in the frame. The time he was seated and the time we see now in the frame.
As he was standing up and stepping towards me,
Okay.
I saw it.
Can we go to the front dining view, please? And may we go back to when Mr. Eldritch is still seated? And please tell us the time.
This is 2:41:03.
Okay, can we go forward a few frames, please? Okay, and can we maybe go back one? Okay, and this number, please, this
Th-
time.
This is 2:41:06.
You've seen him touch his, or pat his waistband by now?
I don't think he's not fully standing now.
Oh, I'm sorry, can we go ahead?
I don't know when exactly it was. It was
Okay,
as he was standing, I saw him touch his waistband.
okay, and at 2:41:08, is he fully standing?
Yes.
So it was sometime between the 3 frames before and now that you saw it?
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, as he stood up and came towards me, his initial standing, I saw him touch. I could not give an exact time frame.
Okay. And when you say touch, what do you mean?
Tap. Fingers right about like that. So elbow slightly bent. Like that.
Okay. And you don't know what he was doing,
No, I don't know what he was doing.
but to you that was a pre-assault indicator.
Touching your waistband can be considered a pre-assault indicator. And when I first saw him do it, I took note of it, but it wasn't until he did it again that I considered it with the totality of the circumstances in the situation.
When was it that you saw him do that again?
He did it again right as he came at me when I first reached for my gun.
Okay, before we get to when you first reached for your gun, can we change back to the cashier view, please? And may we have the time, Mr. Deedy, please?
24109.
Okay, do you see Jessica West in this frame?
I believe so.
She's saying something to you here.
I don't know if she's speaking in this frame. I can see her face.
And her face is directed towards you.
I can see her face squarely. It's perpendicular to mine. It's also in the same direction as Adam. I don't know who she's speaking to or if she's speaking.
Is her mouth open?
I can't tell.
Do you remember her saying anything to you at this time?
No.
Do you remember her saying anything to Adam?
No, I don't.
Do you remember Adam saying anything to you?
No, I don't.
Can we go forward, please? I'm sorry, can you stop and go back one frame? Time, please, Mr. Deedy.
24113.
And do you see yourself in this frame?
Yes, I do.
And do you see Jessica West?
Yes, I do.
And do you see her arm on, or whose arm is that on your left shoulder?
This is Jess West here. This looks like her right arm on my left arm.
Please be seated. And immediately in back of Ms. West is Adam Butowski, is that right?
From my perspective, it looks like he's a little to the left of her.
To the left of her?
I think so.
And they are between you and Colin Eldritch, is that right?
I don't know their exact relative positioning, but in this frame, Mr. Eldritch is on the left. I can see Mr. Bird here. There's Adam Butowski, there's Jess. I don't know, there might be somebody else there. So, there are people in the space between us. I don't know if they're directly between us. Yes, there are people between us.
And at this point in time, you don't know whether Jessica West is telling you to let's go, is that right?
I don't recall that.
And you don't know if Adam is telling you let's just go.
No, I don't recall that.
But whether you recall what they were saying or not, you did not leave at this point in time, is that right?
No, I didn't.
No crime, no federal crime has been committed at this point in time.
It's arguable.
Okay. Were you going to arrest Mr. Eldritch at this time?
No, that was not my intent.
And Mr. Eldritch at this point in time, his aggression was directed solely at you, correct?
At this particular moment, yes.
Please continue. Stop. Time, please.
241:16.
Jessica West is immediately in front of you, looking up to you, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And she has her right arm on your left arm and back area, is that right?
Looks like she has her left arm.
I'm sorry, her right arm.
I'm sorry, it looks like she has her right arm around my waist.
And she's telling you something here, correct?
That's what it looks like.
What was she telling you?
I don't recall.
You don't remember whether she was saying, stop this?
I don't recall that, no.
You don't remember whether she was saying, let's just go?
The only thing I remember her saying during this minute and a half incident was do something.
And at what point in time did she say, do something?
I don't recall when it was. I remember her hearing it. I remember pleading in her voice saying, do something.
Was it before or after this point in time that you've seen them screaming?
I don't know when it was exactly. I think it was after this.
What is Adam doing here?
Adam is standing facing the direction of the trash bin counter, and it looks like he's walking over to it.
Did he have any trash in his hands that you knew of?
Not that I can see.
Can we go forward, please? Stop. Time, please.
2:41:24.
And Jessica West is again in front of you, is that right?
It appears that she's in front of me, a little to the right.
And she has her right arm on your left arm, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And what is she saying to you here?
I don't recall. I don't know if she is saying anything to me.
And Adam, what is he doing?
I don't know what he's doing. He's standing behind me.
You don't know whether he's saying anything to you.
No, I don't.
Your attention is focused solely on Colin Elders,
Yes, I am intently watching Mr. Elders.
and that's because Mr. Elders was, according to what you felt, being aggressive towards you, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And only towards you.
At that moment, yes.
Okay, please continue. I'm sorry. Can we go back a couple? Go forward one, please. And the time frame, please.
2:41:26.
And at this point in time, it appears that you have gotten yourself out of Ms. West's hold and gone around her left side to confront Colin Elders, correct?
No, ma'am.
Have you gotten out of her hold?
I don't believe I would characterize it as having been in her hold.
Okay, her,
And second, I don't remember. I don't know exactly what was happening in this. I remember the course of events as they were before I first reached for my gun, and then after I first reached for my gun, and then prior to the kick. This is in between reaching for my gun and the kick. So this exact frame, I don't know. I don't recall what Jess did or what Adam did. I remember some of the things that Mr. Elders was saying, and that he was moving towards me, and then I tried to move offline and away from him.
okay, wait, so you're saying that you just remember reaching for your gun the first time and the second time?
No, I'm sorry if I misstated that. I'm not saying the only thing I remember is when I reached for my gun. I'm saying this is how I break down my memory of the events and how they occurred. Not frame by frame. I can try to relate frames to what happened in my memory. But this whole thing happened in maybe a minute and a half between the time I started talking to Mr. Elders and from the last shot was fired. We've been going over this for almost 8 hours. It's hard to go by frame. In my memory, the only way to do it, and the way I really recall it, is in a series of events and escalations.
And actually, this is not the first time that you've seen this video, correct?
No, that's correct.
And yesterday wasn't the first time either, correct?
No, it wasn't.
And you've seen this video many times, is that right?
I've watched this video hundreds, if not more, of times. I see it when I close my eyes, and when I try to sleep at night, I see the events again, over and over again.
Please
I
continue.
never stop seeing this.
Please continue. Okay. Stop, please. And the time here, Mr. Deedy, please.
2:41:29.
And at 2:41:29, Mr. Eldridge has stepped back and away from you from what we saw a few frames ago, correct?
I'm sorry, I wasn't watching as you played the video.
Okay, can you take it up then? Okay, look forward. And we are again at 2:41:29.
29.
Thank you. Mr. Eldridge has stepped away from you.
I was previously standing here, and Mr. Eldridge was here. As he came towards me, I stepped offline, and then he moved to his left and backwards, and I moved away from him
He moved back away from you.
after stepping towards me.
And in this frame, he has moved back and away from you.
At this frame, he has moved towards me, and then to his left, backwards, and I have moved backwards and to my left.
And so right now in this frame, you are not as close to each other as you were 2 frames before, correct?
That's
I'm talking about you and Mr. Eldridge.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. West is now between you and Mr. Eldridge.
Yes, that's correct.
Did you fear for her safety at this point in time?
At this point in time, I believe this is when Mr. Elders, had begun to quiet down.
So my question
And-
is,
I'm sorry, you're right, I haven't answered your question. And I believe when I was assessing at this moment, I had my hand on my gun. I was still processing what was going on. And I believe immediately after this, Jess moved to the left and addressed Mr. Taylor. And so right after this, I don't know if it's the next frame or not, there was no one at all between myself and Mr. Elders.
okay, but I'm asking you at this frame, when you have your hand on your gun, did you fear for Ms. West's safety?
I don't know exactly what I was thinking at this time.
Your hand being on your gun, that's a pre-assaultive indicator, correct?
Having my hand with the established grip on my gun is, as we're trained, after you witness an assault or pre-assault indicators, you do that to prepare yourself. Having a hand on a gun is not a pre-assault indicator. That is something that's an overt action. Pre-assault indicators are something that you have to take as a whole and put together. That is an overt action. There's no mistaking that my hand is on that gun and it's a use of force.
So this is an obvious use of force gesture.
Yes, ma'am.
No question about it.
That's correct.
And not only is it a use of force gesture, it's a use of deadly force gesture.
No, ma'am.
Once you pull your gun and fire it, that's deadly force, correct?
When you fired your gun, that is deadly force. But not when you pulled the gun.
So somebody having a hand on their handgun, that's not an indication of imminent use of deadly force?
No, ma'am, that is not imminent deadly force.
No.
An indication of imminent deadly force.
Imminent use.
No, it is not an indication of imminent use of deadly force. I can explain if you like.
It's escalating the show of use of force here, correct?
Yes, it was an escalation of other use of force tactics that I used previously.
So from you, we have the escalation in use of force, first beginning with the showing of your credentials, correct?
No, ma'am.
Didn't you say that that's upping the use of force,
I
showing
did.
your credentials?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then another upping of the use of force from that is your hand on the gun.
Yes, ma'am.
Were there other indicators that you had between showing your credentials and putting your hand on the gun that showed an escalation of use of force?
From myself to Mr. Evans?
Yes.
No, I don't believe so.
Can we go forward, please?
This week it's 4:30. Sorry to interrupt, but, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the day. See you tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning. People have reminded, very much